The year is 1989. The Lenox Spice Village was introduced as a monthly subscription series. First you receive the rack, then each month thereafter pour a little 3-inch porcelain house for storing all of your spices. Somewhere along the way, Avon also released a similar collection. Then fast forward to 2025, after a 35-year hiatus, they have relaunched the collection, but it sold out within hours, and I don't have $300 to spend on space jars when there is rent to pay. So I took a little look to see at both the Lenox Spice jars, because there is no shortage of photos on the internet, and also the Avon Spice Cottage, not to be mistaken with the same one, and began on my own. I do not own a kiln or a ceramic clay that they were originally made out of, but I do own oven-baked clay, aka polymer clay. But that does mean that these aren't food safe. And also, it would take way too much clay to get the thickness that I would need to make these as stable as I would want them, so I cheated just a little bit. I was on the lookout for some thrifted or secondhand glass bottles to use for this, and I found just the ticket. They had to be glass or oven-bake resistant and also food safe because, well, spices. I began rolling out my clay into a thin sheet with a pasta maker, cutting it down to size and placing it around my cylinder glass bottle, making sure that the clay reaches from the top to the bottom. Then I cut it down to size so the edges would meet up perfectly. Flipped it over and cut around the lid, and then blended the lid into the rest of the body. Then began the process of turning this into a cinnamon. As cinnamon comes from the inner bark of a tree, I thought a treehouse literally would be perfect. I also worked on the rooftop, adding the circular swirls you would see if a tree was cut in half. And then using a very tiny straw, widthwise, I've rolled out some thin pieces of clay and wrapped them around the straw to give them that natural curve and cut them to size. Using a crinkled up ball of foil to add texture. I took them off of the straw and then rolled them towards their middle to make some very, very small cinnamon sticks. Using 3 of these to make the door frame, being sure when I added them on I used my utility knife to make sure the tops were more visible. I also cut off some of the excess portions on the top one. Using some more very thin clay, I cut out the shape of a leaf and used the first as a stencil for the second. Inspired by a bug's life, I'm cutting a few lines into leaf to make 2 pieces on each side and pushing the front piece onto the back piece to make something to resemble kind of curtains, I guess. Placing them onto my cinnamon house, and then cutting the clay out that's in between the 2 sets of curtains. So now we have a window, and because it's made out of glass, we have a window that's still not going to make your spices go bad. For the windowsill, I did the same trick with the cinnamon sticks, but even smaller this time around. With a thicker piece of clay, I cut it down to look like a sign and then used a dotting tool to carve the word cinnamon into it. Simply placed it onto my piece and made it look a little bit ragged by cutting down some of the edges further, as well as placing a small ball into the top center to make it look like it's actually hanging there. as well as another small ball as the doorknob. Finally cutting into the clay to reveal the lid as a separate part. In retrospect, I wish I had maybe added another stick of cinnamon or something as a chimney, but you live and you learn. I baked it and now it was time for the paint job. I did an overall brown wash to make sure that all the texture would show through. Dabbed it off and decided I wanted to go a little bit darker, so I did just that. Then I went in with an even darker brown for the cinnamon sticks and the sign. The darkest brown that I had, actually. A vibrant green for the leaf curtains. Then going back to the cinnamon word on the sign, I wanted it to be super easy to read, but also a little bit 3D. So I went in with a white puffy fabric paint. Once that was dry, I did add a layer of resin over top, off camera, and it was time for the next one. For this one, it is the most circular orb-like bottle I could find, and we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. Starting with some foil to shape it out better, and then some foil tape to keep those loose foil pieces in place. And I add my clay on top in a base layer. Squishing all of it down as smooth as my little hands could towards the bottom and then cutting off the excess. I added one thin layer of clay over top of that further so I could add in some detailing without having to worry too much about breaking through. For the top, as this will be a pumpkin, I needed something to shape the stem. So I grabbed the thickest gauge wire I had and used my tried and true trick method of bending it in half, trapping one side with my wire cutter pliers or whatever these are called, and then placing the other loop side into my empty drill. Securing it in place, tightening it, and then turn the drill on to wrap the wire around itself to make it both more secure and thicker. In order to better secure this, I'm placing some foil around the end of the wire that isn't in a loop and making the foil into somewhat of a mountain peak, as well as shaping it into more of a stem shape. Finally, placing more of that foil tape around the entire thing, a bigger chunk at the bottom and then thinner pieces actually wrapping around the thinner wire, making everything one not so solid piece. Then it was clay time once again, with a thin sheet just to cover everything. And then I began to shape it better with a variety of tools, basically anything that would fit into the tiny little crevices. I will literally use anything except a rolling pin, apparently. I have this metal tool. I have no idea what it was originally used for, but I bought it from Sally Beauty Supply within the past 10 years, and it's worked great for shaping clay. So I used it to create the divots that a pumpkin has. As well as shape the stem further with detailing. Now you may not see what photo I'm using for reference, but it is a pumpkin seed. A lot of them. I'm using them for reference for my pumpkin seed door. Cutting out the basic shape and then using the opposite end, or the bottom end I guess, of my utility knife to flatten the edges to about like 50% of the thickness probably. Because this is a pumpkin, I wanted to add some decorations around it, kind of like Cinderella's carriage. I've referenced a cartoon photo of a pumpkin leaf and cut 2 of those out for some plant life around the front. I also rolled out a small snake of clay and flattened it down again with anything other than a rolling pin, and then cut these stairs out. Steps, if you will. Placing them just beneath the door, making sure one was just a little bit bigger than the other, and then I placed the leaves on. When I placed them on, I pushed the bottom middle onto the pumpkin, and then brought the top of the leaf forward just a little bit to add some visual interest. Then just a dot of clay once again for the doorknob. For the name, I did the same thing as I did for the cinnamon, made a thicker piece of clay and then cut around the edges to make a flat cylinder looking piece. Carved pumpkin into one, and then spice into another. Place them onto the pumpkin firmly, with the end of the pumpkin edge and the beginning of the spice edge towards each other up front, and then kind of cascading out, if that makes sense. I think I made it significantly more complicated than it needed to be. And then rolled out a teeny tiny snake of clay and tapered the edges for some more plant life, as if like ivy growing around the leaf. Also adding some leaf texture. The line through the middle and at each point. Then it was time to bake and then paint. For obvious reasons, I used a color called Pure Pumpkin for an all-over color. I'm thinking this will be the best, because, well, Pure Pumpkin. How fitting. And the same Pure Pumpkin mixed with a little bit of brown for the divots, which I added a little bit into it and then blended it out with a bigger brush with more of that Pure Pumpkin on it. The seed door, I painted a base color of yellow. And while that was drying, I painted the steps a dark brown. The leaves a light green. As well as the sign, which is already an off-white, but I wanted it to be a stark white. By this point, the yellow door was already dry, so I gave it a dry dab with a medium brown. And the doorknob got a black. The details on the leaf, now that the green had dried down, was just a darker green, which I added on with a nail dotting tool. I'm using a yellow puffy fabric paint to paint the words on the sign. I've mixed up a fairly dark, almost black green for the stem, which I also used with a nail dotting tool on the vines growing around the leaves. And finally, a dry brush of brown to the stem. Then once again, off camera, I added a thin layer of resin onto the piece. And that is it for today's video, and I do hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.